The radar screen flickered with an impossible signature. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reaper Thornfield squinted at the green phosphorescent blip that shouldn't exist, his fingers hovering over the communication array of his F-35 Lightning II. At 37,000 feet above the contested airspace of the Korean peninsula, the stealth fighter's advanced sensors painted a picture that defied every protocol in the manual. The contact was moving at subsonic speed, broadcasting on an encrypted frequency that had been classified obsolete 15 years ago. "Tower, this is Reaper 1 Actual," Thornfield's voice crackled through his oxygen mask, the familiar weight of his helmet pressing against his skull. "I'm showing a lone contact, bearing 270, altitude 35,000. Aircraft type unknown, but she's squawking on Victor 77 frequency." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds too long. In aerial combat, 4 seconds was a lifetime, enough for a missile to travel 3 miles, enough for a pilot's heart to skip several beats, enough for doubt to creep into the mind of even the most seasoned aviator. When the response finally came, it carried the unmistakable tension of a control tower suddenly faced with something their computers couldn't explain. "Reaper 1 Actual, Tower. Negative on any scheduled traffic in that sector. Please confirm your sensor readings." Thornfield's eyes swept across his cockpit's glass displays, each screen confirming what seemed impossible. The aircraft below wasn't just unidentified, it was broadcasting using communication protocols that predated modern warfare by a generation. His wingman, Captain Riley "Ghost" Martinez, had pulled into a wide formation beside him, the angular silhouette of her F-35 cutting through the thin air like a metallic predator. "Ghost, you picking up this contact?" Thornfield transmitted on the tactical frequency, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "Affirmative, Reaper. And boss." Martinez's voice carried an edge of confusion that was uncharacteristic for the usually unflappable pilot. "That frequency she's using. My grandfather flew missions using that encryption during Desert Storm." The mysterious aircraft below maintained its steady course, seemingly oblivious to the 2 fifth-generation fighters now tracking its every movement. Thornfield adjusted his helmet's heads-up display, the amber symbols and readouts reflecting off his visor as he processed the tactical situation. Whoever was piloting that aircraft knew they were being watched. The steady, rhythmic pulse of the ancient frequency wasn't random. It was deliberate, methodical, almost like a heartbeat transmitted across the electromagnetic spectrum. Something about that signal pattern felt familiar, tugging at memories Thornfield couldn't quite grasp. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pacific Ocean below, its golden light reflecting off the waves in patterns that seemed to mirror the mysterious signal emanating from the unknown aircraft. Thornfield had logged over 2,000 flight hours in combat zones, from the dusty skis above Afghanistan to the tense air corridors near the South China Sea. He had faced enemy fighters, surface-to-air missiles, and weather systems that could tear an aircraft apart. But this was different. This felt personal. "Tower, Reaper 1 actual," he transmitted again, his voice carrying the authority of a pilot who had earned his rank through blood and skill. "Request permission to intercept and identify unknown contact. We're going to take a closer look." The response came immediately, sharp and uncompromising. "Negative, Reaper 1 actual. Maintain current altitude and bearing. Do not engage unknown contact. We're scrambling additional assets to your location." But Thornfield was already banking his aircraft into a shallow descent. The F-35's fly-by-wire system responding instantly to his inputs. The heads-up display painted targeting solutions across his field of vision, but his finger remained away from the weapon systems. This wasn't about aggression. It was about answers. As they descended through 30,000 feet, the mystery aircraft came into visual range. Through his helmet's integrated targeting system, Thornfield could make out the distinctive silhouette of what appeared to be an older generation fighter, sleek, angular, but lacking the advanced stealth characteristics of modern combat aircraft. The sunlight glinted off its canopy, and for a brief moment he thought he could see the outline of a pilot's helmet inside. "A ghost, you seeing this?" he transmitted to Martinez. "Roger that, boss. Looks like an F-16 variant, maybe early block model, but those aren't supposed to be operating in this sector." The unknown pilot seemed to sense their approach. The aircraft executed a smooth banking turn, not aggressive or evasive, but deliberate. It was then that Thornfield noticed something that made his breath catch in his throat. Painted on the aircraft's tail, barely visible through the magnification of his targeting system, was a squadron insignia he hadn't seen in over a decade. The 77th Fighter Squadron, the Gamblers, a unit that had been officially disbanded after Operation Iraqi Freedom, its pilots scattered to other commands, its aircraft retired or transferred to training squadrons. Thornfield had served with the 77th early in his career, had known pilots who wore that insignia with pride, had attended memorial services for friends whose names were now etched in granite monuments. The radio crackled with static, and then a voice emerged from the electromagnetic noise. A voice that spoke with the calm professionalism of a combat pilot, but carried an accent that suggested years of service in different theaters of operation. "Lightning Flight, this is Valkyrie 77. I see you boys up there. Mind if we have ourselves a little chat?" The voice was female, calm, and carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had spent years talking other pilots through life-and-death situations. Thornfield felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature at altitude. The call sign, Valkyrie, had belonged to only one pilot he had ever known, and she had been declared killed in action over Syria 8 years ago. Martinez's voice crackled over the tactical frequency, barely controlled excitement bleeding through her professional demeanor. "Boss, that call sign. Isn't that?" "I know," Thornfield cut her off, his mind racing through the implications. Major Catherine Valkyrie Hendricks had been one of the most skilled pilots in the Air Force, a legend among those who knew her reputation. She had flown over 300 combat missions, earned 2 distinguished flying crosses, and mentored dozens of younger pilots through their first combat deployments. Her F-16 had been shot down during a close air support mission gone wrong. Her body never recovered from the wreckage that had been scattered across hostile territory. But the voice on the radio was unmistakably hers, measured, confident, tinged with the slight southern drawl that had made her radio calls distinctive among the chaos of combat communications. Thornfield had flown with her during his early years, had learned more about air-to-air tactics in 6 months under her tutelage than most pilots learned in their entire careers. "Valkyrie 77, this is Reaper 1 Actual," Thornfield transmitted, his voice carefully controlled. "Please state your intentions and current mission status." The pause that followed stretched longer than military radio protocol typically allowed. When the response came, it carried a weight that seemed to compress the very air inside Thornfield's cockpit. "Reaper, I've got a package that needs delivery. Some folks back home have been asking the wrong questions, and I've got answers that might not sit well with the chain of command. I need safe passage to friendly airspace, and I need pilots I can trust." The implications hit Thornfield like a physical blow. If Catherine Hendricks was alive, and the evidence suggested she was, then everything about her supposed death had been a lie. More importantly, if she was requesting safe passage while broadcasting on obsolete frequencies and avoiding standard identification protocols, she was operating outside official channels for reasons that could only be described as dangerous. The F-35's advanced computer systems continued to track the older aircraft, calculating intercept courses and engagement parameters that Thornfield had no intention of using. This wasn't about following orders anymore. It was about loyalty to a fellow pilot and the unspoken bonds that held military aviation together. "Ghost, what's your fuel status?" he asked Martinez over the tactical frequency. 67%, boss. Enough for extended operations if needed." Thornfield made a decision that would either end his career or validate everything he believed about duty and honor. "Valkyrie 77, this is Reaper 1 Actual. We're going to escort you to the deck. Stay on my wing and follow my lead." The response came immediately, and for the first time in the conversation, he could hear something that might have been relief in Catherine Hendrick's voice. "Copy that, Reaper. Valkyrie 77 is on your wing. And Marcus, thanks for remembering how to be a pilot instead of just following orders." The fact that she knew his first name shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. It also confirmed beyond any doubt that the woman flying that F-16 was exactly who she claimed to be. The question now was what kind of package she was carrying, and why she needed to deliver it outside normal channels. As they descended toward the deck in loose formation, Thornfield's radio erupted with urgent transmissions from air traffic control, demanding immediate compliance with previous orders and threatening disciplinary action. He switched off the primary communication array and focused on the tactical frequency that connected him to Martinez and the mysterious pilot who had supposedly been dead for 8 years. "Valkyrie, we're going to need more information if we're going to help you get wherever you're going," Thornfield transmitted. "What kind of package are we talking about, and who's going to be shooting at us when we try to deliver it?" Catherine's response was measured, but carried the weight of someone who had spent years planning for this moment. The kind of package that explains why certain missions went wrong, why good pilots died for bad intelligence, and why some people in very high places would prefer that certain classified files never see the light of day. As for who's going to be shooting at us, let's just say we need to assume everyone wearing a uniform is potentially hostile until proven otherwise. The three aircraft continued their descent through 20,000 feet, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean spreading out below them like a blue-gray carpet. Thornfield's mind raced through the tactical implications of what Catherine was telling him. If she was right, if there had been deliberate misdirection, or worse, in the planning and execution of combat missions, then the ramifications extended far beyond the three of them flying in formation above the waves. Martinez's voice crackled over the radio, tension evident despite her professional demeanor. "Boss, we've got company. 4 contacts, bearing 090, climbing fast. Looks like F-22s based on the radar signature." Thornfield's threat warning system painted the approaching aircraft on his heads-up display, their advanced stealth characteristics making them difficult to track but not impossible for the F-35's sophisticated sensors. The F-22 Raptors were the Air Force's premier air superiority fighters, faster and more maneuverable than his Lightning II, with pilots who were trained to win air-to-air engagements against any opponent. "Valkyrie, we've got Raptors inbound. This is about to get complicated." Catherine's response carried the calm confidence of a pilot who had faced impossible odds before. "Copy that, Reaper. I've been expecting them. Those boys are flying under special orders. They're not going to be interested in radio calls or identification procedures. They're going to try to force us down or worse." The implications of that statement settled over Thornfield like a cold weight. If Catherine was right, then the approaching F-22s weren't flying a standard intercept mission. They were operating under rules of engagement that prioritized stopping her package from reaching its destination, regardless of the cost to the pilots involved. All aircraft, this is Raptor Lead. A new voice crackled over the emergency frequency, carrying the clipped professionalism of an experienced fighter pilot. Unknown aircraft in formation bearing 270, you are ordered to proceed to the nearest military installation for immediate landing and inspection. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Thornfield recognized the term enforcement action from classified briefings. It was military euphemism for being shot down. The F-22 flight leader wasn't making suggestions. He was delivering an ultimatum with the firepower to back it up. Catherine's voice cut through the tension on their tactical frequency. "Gentlemen, this is where things get interesting. Marcus, Riley, I need you to understand that what happens in the next few minutes is going to define the rest of your careers and quite possibly your lives. I won't blame you if you decide to break formation and let the Raptors have me." Thornfield found himself thinking about the oath he had sworn as an officer, about duty and honor and loyalty to the Constitution rather than to individuals or institutions. He thought about the pilots he had served with who had died in missions that might have been compromised from the beginning, about families who deserved to know why their sons and daughters hadn't come home. "A negative, Valkyrie," he transmitted. "We're staying with you. Ghost, you still on board?" Martinez's response came without hesitation. "Till the end, boss. These Raptor boys want a fight. We'll give them one they'll remember." The F-22s had closed to within 10 miles, their angular silhouettes visible now as dark specks against the afternoon sky. Thornfield could see their weapon bay doors opening, the deadly efficiency of the Raptor's design evident in every line of the aircraft. Each F-22 carried a complement of AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles and AIM-9 Sidewinders, more than enough firepower to eliminate 3 older generation fighters. Catherine's tactical assessment crackled over the radio. "Raptors are splitting into 2 pairs, classic pincer movement. They're going to try to box us in, force us to surrender or engage on their terms. I've got a better idea." Without warning, the F-16 rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive, accelerating toward the ocean surface with the kind of aggressive maneuvering that pushed the limits of both aircraft and pilot. Thornfield and Martinez followed, their F-35s fly-by-wire systems compensating for the sudden change in flight profile as they plunged toward the deck. "Stay tight on me," Catherine transmitted, her voice strained by the G-forces but still controlled. "We're going to use the surface clutter to mask our signatures. These Raptors are good, but they're trained for high-altitude intercepts. Let's see how they handle a knife fight in the weeds. The three aircraft leveled off at less than 500 feet above the ocean, the spray from the waves visible in their peripheral vision as they thundered across the water at maximum sustainable speed. The F-22s followed, but their larger size and higher wing loading made low-altitude flight more challenging, forcing them to work harder to maintain formation and targeting solutions. Thornfield's threat warning system screamed with missile lock alerts as the Raptors attempted to engage. The proximity to the water surface created electromagnetic interference that degraded the effectiveness of both radar-guided and heat-seeking missiles, buying them precious seconds, but not eliminating the threat entirely. Raptor lead to unknown aircraft. The F-22 flight leader transmitted, frustration evident in his voice. You are in violation of multiple federal aviation regulations and military flight restrictions. Climb to Angels 20 and proceed to nearest airfield immediately. Catherine's response was delivered with the kind of calm professionalism that could only come from years of combat experience. Raptor lead, this is Valkyrie 77. I am a commissioned officer of the United States Air Force operating under emergency authority. The cargo I'm carrying contains evidence of war crimes and treason at the highest levels of command. Stand down and allow safe passage to deliver this intelligence to appropriate oversight authorities. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough for Thornfield to realize that Catherine had just painted a target on all three of them. If her claims were true, then powerful people with significant resources would do anything to prevent that intelligence from reaching the wrong hands. If her claims were false, then she was either delusional or part of a larger conspiracy that could extend to anyone in the chain of command. The Raptor flight leader's response eliminated any remaining ambiguity. Valkyrie 77, you are ordered to surrender immediately. You have 10 seconds to comply before we engage with lethal force. Thornfield felt the familiar cocktail of adrenaline and focused calm that came with imminent combat. His training took over. Years of air-to-air tactics and weapons employment procedures flooding his consciousness as his hands moved automatically across the cockpit controls. Beside him, Martinez was executing similar preparations. Her F-35 sensors and weapons systems coming online in preparation for the engagement that now seemed inevitable. Marcus, Catherine transmitted, using his first name again in a way that cut through the military formality of the situation. I need you to know that everything I'm telling you is true. The evidence I'm carrying will expose a network of corruption that extends to the Pentagon, to defense contractors, to politicians who sent good people to die for profit margins and political expediency. Some very powerful people want me dead, and they're not going to stop with just me. The 10-second deadline expired with the electronic wail of missile launch warnings filling the cockpits of all three aircraft. The F-22s had fired AIM-120 missiles, their radar-guided warheads streaking through the thin air toward the formation flying barely above the ocean surface. "Break, break, break," Thornfield shouted over the radio, his F-35 pulling into a violent left turn that subjected his body to crushing G-forces. Martinez broke right, her aircraft disappearing into a cloud of chaff and flares as she sought to confuse the incoming missiles. Catherine's F-16 climbed sharply, using the older aircraft's superior maneuverability to execute a barrel roll that would have been impossible in the heavier, more advanced fighters. The first missile detonated harmlessly in the chaff cloud that Martinez had deployed, its proximity fuse triggered by the metallic strips floating in the air. The second missile maintained its lock on Thornfield's F-35, forcing him into increasingly desperate evasive maneuvers as the weapon closed to lethal range. "Reaper, you've got a missile tracking hot," Martinez called over the radio, her own aircraft pulling back into formation after successfully evading the attack. Thornfield waited until the last possible moment before deploying his final countermeasures. The F-35's advanced electronic warfare systems flooding the surrounding airspace with false radar returns and infrared signatures. The missile, confused by the electronic noise, detonated 50 feet to his left, close enough to rattle his aircraft but not close enough to cause serious damage. Catherine's voice cut through the chaos. "All aircraft follow my lead. We're going to show these Raptor pilots that experience beats technology every time." The F-16 accelerated toward the F-22 formation, closing the distance in a head-on attack run that violated every principle of air-to-air engagement taught in fighter pilot training. The Raptors, expecting the older aircraft to maintain defensive positioning, were caught off guard by the aggressive maneuver. At the last possible moment, Catherine pulled her aircraft into a vertical climb that brought her directly above the lead Raptor, close enough that the pilots could have made eye contact through their canopies. The psychological impact of the maneuver was devastating. It demonstrated not only superior piloting skill, but also a level of tactical confidence that suggested this mysterious pilot was exactly who she claimed to be. "Raptor lead, this is Valkyrie," Catherine transmitted, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "You boys fly pretty, but you think too much. Sometimes the best tactical solution is the one that doesn't make sense on paper." The F-22 formation scattered, their pilots suddenly forced to reassess their tactical assumptions about the aircraft they were facing. In air-to-air combat, psychological advantage was often more important than technological superiority, And Catherine had just demonstrated that she understood warfare at a level that went beyond equipment specifications and missile ranges. Thornfield found himself grinning inside his oxygen mask, despite the danger of the situation. He had forgotten what it was like to fly with a pilot who treated aerial combat as an art form rather than a technical exercise. Catherine Hendricks had always possessed an intuitive understanding of flight dynamics and tactical positioning that elevated her beyond the level of merely skilled aviator. "Ghost, you still with us?" he transmitted to Martinez. "Roger that, boss. That was some impressive flying from our mystery lady. These Raptor boys don't know what hit them." The F-22s had regrouped and were maintaining a respectful distance, their pilots clearly reassessing the threat level posed by the formation they had been ordered to intercept. The engagement had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it had fundamentally changed the dynamic of the encounter. The Raptors still possessed overwhelming firepower advantage, but they no longer held the psychological initiative. Catherine's voice crackled over the tactical frequency. "Gentlemen, we need to press our advantage while we have it. I know a place where we can set down, secure the aircraft, and figure out our next move. But we need to move fast. Those Raptor pilots are going to call for backup, and next time they'll come with orders that don't leave room for fancy flying." Thornfield checked his navigation display, calculating fuel consumption rates and distance to potential landing sites. They had perhaps 30 minutes of flight time remaining before fuel became a critical factor, limiting their options and forcing tactical decisions based on necessity rather than strategy. "Where are we going, Valkyrie?" he asked. "There's an abandoned airstrip about 60 miles southeast of our current position. It was built during the Cold War as an emergency landing site for strategic reconnaissance missions. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's exactly what we need. A place where we can disappear while we figure out how to get this intelligence to the right people." The 3 aircraft turned southeast, maintaining low altitude to avoid radar detection from other military assets that might be converging on their position. Behind them, the F-22s followed at a distance, their pilots apparently under orders to track rather than engage, unless the situation changed dramatically. As they flew toward the unknown destination, Thornfield found himself contemplating the magnitude of the decision he had made. By choosing to escort Catherine rather than comply with official orders, he had effectively ended his military career and possibly opened himself to charges of treason or conspiracy. But looking at the situation from the perspective of his oath as an officer, he was convinced he had made the right choice. "Valkyrie, can you give us any more details about what we're carrying?" Martinez asked over the radio. Catherine's response was measured and serious. "Video recordings, classified documents, and testimony from witnesses who were present during planning sessions for several high-profile missions that went wrong. Names, dates, financial transactions, and communication records that show a pattern of deliberate misdirection and information manipulation. People who wore the uniform and swore the same oath we did, who decided that personal profit was more important than the lives of the pilots they were sending into harm's way. The weight of that revelation settled over the formation like a dark cloud. If Catherine's claims were accurate, then they were carrying evidence that could bring down senior military officers, defense industry executives, and possibly elected officials. The implications extended far beyond the three pilots flying above the Pacific Ocean. This was the kind of intelligence that could reshape public understanding of recent military operations and potentially prevent similar abuses in the future. The abandoned airstrip appeared on the horizon exactly as Catherine had described it. A concrete runway carved out of a small island, weathered by years of salt spray and neglect, but still capable of supporting aircraft operations. No buildings were visible, just the runway itself, and what appeared to be covered revetments where aircraft could be hidden from overhead surveillance. Raptor lead to Valkyrie 77. The F-22 flight leader transmitted as they approached the landing site. "You are approaching restricted airspace. Any attempt to land will be considered a hostile act." Catherine's response carried the tone of someone who had reached the end of a very long journey. "Raptor lead, I've been flying combat missions since before your flight leader was old enough to drive. I've lost friends to bad intelligence, seen good pilots die for missions that were compromised from the beginning, and spent 8 years gathering evidence that proves it. You can shoot me down if your orders require it, but this intelligence is going to reach the right people whether I survive or not." The F-22s maintained their patrol pattern as the three aircraft touched down on the abandoned runway, their landing gear absorbing the impact of contact with concrete that hadn't seen regular maintenance in decades. Thornfield felt his heart rate slowly returning to normal as his F-35 rolled to a stop near one of the covered revetments. The familiar sensation of being back on solid ground, providing a momentary respite from the tension of the flight. As he powered down his aircraft systems and began the process of securing the cockpit, Thornfield realized that landing on this remote strip had been the easy part. Now they had to figure out how to get Catherine's evidence to authorities who could act on it without alerting the very people who wanted it suppressed. Catherine was already out of her aircraft, moving with the efficient precision of a pilot who had performed post-flight procedures thousands of times. Even after 8 years in hiding, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of a professional aviator, alert, confident, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Welcome to nowhere, gentlemen," she called out as Thornfield and Martinez climbed down from their cockpits. Population, us, plus whoever's monitoring the satellites that are probably watching this conversation. For the first time, Thornfield could see Catherine Hendricks clearly without the distortion of aircraft canopies and helmet visors. She appeared older than he remembered, with lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions and under constant stress. But her gaze remained sharp and focused, the eyes of someone who had seen too much but refused to be broken by the experience. "Catherine," he said, using her first name deliberately to acknowledge the personal nature of their reunion. "We need to know everything. What happened 8 years ago, how you survived, and most importantly, what's in that evidence package that's worth risking all our lives?" She nodded, as if she had been expecting the question and had spent years preparing the answer. 8 years ago, my F-16 was shot down over Syria during what was supposed to be a routine close air support mission. The intelligence we were given was wrong, deliberately wrong. Instead of supporting friendly ground forces, we flew directly into a trap that had been coordinated between certain elements in our command structure and enemy forces on the ground. The implications of that statement hit Thornfield like a physical blow. Military personnel collaborating with enemy forces wasn't just treason. It was a betrayal of trust that undermined the foundation of everything he believed about service and sacrifice. "I managed to eject before my aircraft was completely destroyed," Catherine continued, her voice steady but carrying the weight of painful memories. "I was captured, but not by the people we thought were our enemies. I was held by a group of Syrian intelligence officers who had been in contact with American officials for months before the mission. They showed me communications, financial records, and video recordings that proved certain high-ranking officers were providing tactical information in exchange for access to oil reserves and mineral rights." Martinez, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found her voice. That's impossible. The oversight systems, the chain of command reviews, the congressional briefings, all compromised," Catherine replied. "The people involved weren't low-level operatives making opportunistic deals. These were senior officials with the authority to classify information, control mission parameters, and determine which intelligence reached operational commanders. They had the power to make their crimes look like tactical mistakes or intelligence failures." Thornfield's mind raced through the implications of what she was describing. If senior military officials were deliberately compromising missions for personal gain, then every operation conducted during that period was potentially suspect. Pilots who had been killed in action might actually have been murdered by their own command structure, their deaths used to cover up evidence of the larger conspiracy. "How did you escape?" he asked. Catherine's expression hardened. "The Syrian intelligence officers who captured me weren't interested in holding an American pilot indefinitely. They wanted someone who could carry their evidence back to the United States and expose the corruption that was getting people killed on both sides of the conflict. They helped me disappear, provided false documentation, and gave me access to their intelligence files in exchange for a promise that I would find a way to make the information public. The three pilots stood in the shadow of Catherine's F-16, the weight of her revelations settling over them like a storm cloud. The aircraft that had carried her to this remote meeting point was more than just transportation. It was evidence in itself, proof that she had maintained access to military resources and technical expertise during her years in hiding. The question now, Catherine continued, is what we do with this information. The people involved have spent 8 years consolidating power and eliminating potential threats. They know I survived. They know I've been gathering evidence. And they know that eventually I would try to make contact with pilots I could trust. Thornfield looked up at the sky, where the F-22s were still maintaining their patrol pattern. The Raptor pilots were following orders, probably unaware of the larger conspiracy that had led to this confrontation. But their presence meant that powerful people knew exactly where Catherine was and what she was trying to accomplish. We need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it without being compromised, he said. But who do we trust? If this conspiracy extends as high as you're suggesting, then normal channels are useless. Catherine reached into her flight suit and withdrew a sealed envelope, its edges worn from handling, but the contents clearly intact. I've spent 8 years thinking about that exact question. There are still good people in positions of authority, people who care more about duty and honor than about personal advancement. But reaching them requires getting past the people who want this information buried forever. Martinez stepped closer, her expression serious. What's the plan? Catherine looked at each of them in turn, her gaze measuring and evaluating. The plan requires trust, courage, and a willingness to sacrifice everything you've worked for in service of something larger than yourselves. Are you both prepared for that level of commitment? Thornfield didn't hesitate. We're here, aren't we? We threw away our careers the moment we decided to escort you instead of following orders. Whatever happens next, we're in this together. The sun was beginning to set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the abandoned airstrip and painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Thornfield of tracer fire and distant explosions. Somewhere above them, satellite cameras were recording every movement, and communication intercepts were analyzing every radio transmission. The people Catherine was trying to expose would be mobilizing resources to prevent her mission from succeeding. But for the first time in 8 years, Catherine Hendricks was no longer flying alone. She had allies, fellow pilots who understood the true meaning of the oath they had sworn, and the responsibilities that came with wearing the uniform. The evidence she carried might be enough to expose corruption at the highest levels of government and military command, but only if they could find a way to deliver it to the right people. As darkness began to fall over the remote airstrip, the three pilots prepared for what might be the most important mission of their lives. Not a combat operation against foreign enemies, but a fight to preserve the integrity of the institutions they had sworn to defend. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the odds couldn't be worse. But they were pilots, trained to face impossible situations with skill, courage, and unwavering commitment to the mission. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them together as warriors who had chosen duty over safety and honor over personal preservation. The real battle was just beginning. Catherine's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she spread a collection of documents across the wing of her F-16, using the aircraft's surface as an improvised briefing table. In the fading light, Thornfield could see photographs, communication transcripts, and what appeared to be financial records, all bearing classification markings that indicated their extreme sensitivity. "This is what we're carrying," she said, her voice taking on the clipped professionalism of a military briefer. Operation Steel Rain, Operation Desert Lightning, and Operation Mountain Thunder, three separate missions conducted over an 18-month period, each resulting in significant friendly casualties that were officially attributed to intelligence failures or tactical miscalculations. She pointed to a series of photographs showing aircraft wreckage and casualty reports. What these documents prove is that each mission was compromised from the planning stage. Target coordinates were deliberately altered, threat assessments were falsified, and air support was diverted at critical moments. 37 pilots and aircrew members died in these three operations alone. Martinez leaned closer, studying the documents with the intense focus of someone trained to analyze complex tactical situations. These communication logs show direct contact between U.S. command elements and hostile forces. They're sharing operational parameters, flight routes, and timing information. "Exactly," Catherine confirmed. "But it gets worse. The financial records show payment transfers from offshore accounts controlled by defense contractors to personal accounts belonging to the officers who authorized the compromised intelligence. They weren't just selling out missions. They were profiting from the deaths of their own people." Thornfield felt a cold rage building in his chest as he processed the magnitude of what Catherine was showing them. The pilots who had died in those operations weren't casualties of war. They were victims of murder, killed by people who had sworn the same oath of service and loyalty. "How did you get access to all this information?" he asked. Catherine's expression grew distant, as if she were remembering events that she would prefer to forget. The Syrian intelligence officers who captured me had been monitoring American military communications for months before my mission. They knew something was wrong when they started receiving tactical information that was too accurate, too detailed to be the result of normal intelligence gathering. They began investigating, documenting everything they could intercept. She pulled out another set of documents, these bearing Syrian government seals and Arabic text alongside English translations. When they realized the scope of what they were dealing with, they understood that exposure of the conspiracy was in their own strategic interests. Dead American pilots meant reduced air support for coalition forces, but systematic corruption in the U.S. military command structure was a long-term threat to regional stability. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Syrian intelligence officers had shown more loyalty to the principles of military honor than some of their own commanders. The enemy had helped preserve evidence of American war crimes, not out of altruism, but because they understood that corruption at the highest levels of the U.S. military was a threat to everyone. "So where do we take this?" Martinez asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on all their minds. Who can we trust to act on this information without being compromised or silenced? Catherine folded the documents carefully and returned them to a waterproof pouch inside her flight suit. There's a Congressional Oversight Committee that's been asking uncomfortable questions about defense contractor relationships and military procurement processes. The committee chair is a former Marine officer who lost his son in Iraq, someone who understands the cost of military service and isn't likely to be bought or intimidated. Thornfield nodded, recognizing the strategic logic of her plan. Congressional oversight committees had the authority to investigate military operations and the political independence to pursue